The Art of War is a classic Chinese military treatise that has influenced the history and culture of China and beyond. The book was written by Sun Tzu, a high-ranking military general, strategist, and tactician who lived in the 5th century BC. The book is considered one of the oldest and most authoritative works on military strategy, and it reflects Sun Tzu's deep understanding of human nature, warfare, and leadership. The book is composed of 13 chapters, each of which focuses on a different aspect of warfare. The chapters cover topics such as planning, maneuvering, deception, terrain, and fire. The book provides practical advice and timeless wisdom on how to win wars and achieve victory. The book also emphasizes the importance of avoiding unnecessary conflict, adapting to changing circumstances, and using intelligence and creativity. The teachings of the art of war have been applied to various fields, including business, politics, and sports. The book offers valuable insights and guidance on how to deal with conflict, competition, and change in any situation. The book has inspired leaders and thinkers from ancient times to modern days, such as Napoleon, Mao Zedong, and Steve Jobs. The book has also influenced the strategies and tactics of military academies, business schools, and sports coaches around the world. The Art of War is a masterpiece of literature and philosophy that has transcended its original context and purpose. The book is widely read and studied by people from all walks of life who seek to improve their skills, knowledge, and performance. The book is also a source of inspiration and motivation for those who face challenges and difficulties in their personal and professional lives. The book is a testament to the enduring power and relevance of Sun Tzu's vision and wisdom. As mentioned, the book has 13 chapters, each focusing on a different aspect of warfare. Here are the titles of the chapters. Chapter 1, Estimates. Chapter 2, Waging War. Chapter 3, Offensive Strategy. Chapter 4, Dispositions. Chapter 5, Forces. Chapter 6, Weaknesses and Strengths. Chapter 7, Engagements. Chapter 8, Variations and Adaptability. Chapter 9, Movement and Development of Troops. Chapter 10, Terrain. Chapter 11, 9 Grounds. Chapter 12, Fire Attacks. Chapter 13, Intelligence and Espionage. The first chapter of The Art of War is called Laying Plans. In this chapter, Sun Tzu introduces the main theme of his book. The art of war is of vital importance to the state, and it is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. He then explains the 5 factors that determine the outcome of war: the moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline. He advises the general to compare these factors with those of the enemy, and to assess the situation carefully before engaging in battle. He also warns against waging war without a clear purpose, plan, or calculation. He concludes by saying that the general who knows these factors will be victorious, and the one who does not will fail. The second chapter is called Waging War. In this chapter, Sun Tzu discusses the equipment, provisioning, and support of an army sent into battle. He emphasizes the use of both speed and deception to minimize the cost and duration of war. He also advises the general to be frugal and efficient in managing the army's resources and to avoid prolonged campaigns that would exhaust the soldiers and the people. He warns against plundering the enemy's territory, as it would make the army dependent on external supplies and vulnerable to attack. He concludes by saying that the best way to win a war is to attack the enemy's strategy, then his alliances, then his army, and finally his cities. Third chapter. In this chapter, Sun Tzu emphasizes the importance of planning and strategy in warfare. He argues that the best way to defeat an enemy is to avoid direct confrontation and instead attack their plans, alliances, or morale. He considers siege warfare to be the most costly and least effective form of fighting, and advises generals to use it only as a last resort. He also outlines the factors that determine the outcome of a battle, such as the knowledge of oneself and the enemy, the size and unity of the forces, the patience and discipline of the commander, and the support and interference of the ruler. He concludes that the ultimate skill in war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Chapter 4, Dispositions. In this chapter, Sun Tzu explains how a skillful general should manage his own strength and exploit the enemy's weakness. He says that the good fighters of old first ensured their own invulnerability and then waited for the opportunity to defeat the enemy. He also says that security against defeat lies in one's own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Therefore, the good fighter is able to secure himself against defeat, but cannot make certain of defeating the enemy. Sun Tzu then distinguishes between defensive and offensive tactics and says that the former indicates insufficient strength, while the latter indicates a superabundance of strength. He says that the general who is skilled in defense hides in the most secret recesses of the earth, while the general who is skilled in attack flashes forth from the topmost heights of heaven. Thus, they are able to protect themselves and win. Sun Tzu also warns against seeking fame or honor by winning ordinary victories and says that the heroes of old won easy victories because they were subtle and profound. He says that the skillful general's victories are flawless because they are inevitable. He beats an already defeated enemy and takes strong ground and pounces on every opportunity. He says that victorious armies do not seek out battles first, but seek first victory, while defeated armies do the opposite. Sun Tzu then discusses the importance of knowing the enemy and oneself, and says that the general who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be endangered in 100 battles. He says that the general who knows himself but not the enemy will suffer one defeat for every victory. He says that the general who knows neither the enemy nor himself will invariably be defeated. Sun Tzu concludes the chapter by saying that the general who is skilled in strategy keeps the way and the law, and is thus master of victory and defeat. He says that the general who understands the nature of his men, their forms and dispositions, can engineer the situation to release their innate power like a waterfall, crushing the enemy army. He gives examples of how to use different types of troops, such as chariots, cavalry, and infantry, according to the terrain and the enemy's situation. Chapter 5, Forces. Sun Tzu begins this chapter by stating that the ultimate goal of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. He argues that this can be achieved by attacking the enemy's strategy, alliances, or army, in that order of preference. He considers siege warfare to be the most costly and least effective form of fighting, and advises generals to use it only as a last resort. He then outlines the qualities and skills that a good general should possess, such as patience, discipline, decisiveness, and wisdom. He emphasizes the importance of avoiding being provoked or interfered by the sovereign, and of knowing oneself and the enemy. He says that the general who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be endangered in 100 battles, while the general who knows neither will invariably be defeated. He concludes the chapter by saying that the general who is skilled in strategy keeps the way and the law, and is thus master of victory and defeat. He says that the general who understands the nature of his men, their forms and dispositions, can engineer the situation to release their innate power like a waterfall, crushing the enemy army. He gives examples of how to use different types of troops, such as chariots, cavalry, and infantry, according to the terrain and the enemy's situation. Chapter 6. In Chapter 6, titled Weak Points and Strong, Sun Tzu explains how a skillful general should manage his own strength and exploit the enemy's weakness. He compares the general to a master of music, colors, and flavors, who can create infinite variations from a few basic elements. He also compares the general to a master of nature, who can harness the momentum and timing of water, wind, fire, and earth. Sun Tzu advises the general to be flexible and adaptable, to use deception and surprise, and to coordinate his troops with signals and banners. He says that the general who can master the use of direct and indirect forces is like heaven and earth, sun and moon, and the seasons, who never cease to change and renew themselves. Direct forces are the forces that are visible and obvious, such as the main army, the frontal attack, and the strong position. Indirect forces are the forces that are hidden and subtle, such as the diversion, the ambush, and the weak position. Sun Tzu says that the general should use direct forces to engage the enemy, and indirect forces to win the enemy. He says that the general should use direct forces to fix the enemy in place, and indirect forces to strike the enemy where he is unprepared. Sun Tzu also warns against using only direct forces or only indirect forces, as that would make the general predictable and vulnerable. He says that the general should use both direct and indirect forces in harmony and balance, like the yin and yang. He says that the general should use direct and indirect forces in alternation and combination, like the hard and soft. He says that the general should use direct and indirect forces in proportion and adaptation, like the high and low. By using direct and indirect forces wisely, the general can create situations where the enemy is forced to engage, where the enemy's weaknesses are exposed, and where the enemy's strengths are neutralized. By using direct and indirect forces effectively, the general can achieve victory without fighting or with minimal fighting. Chapter 7, Engagements. In Chapter 7, titled Engagements, Sun Tzu explains how a skillful general should approach and fight the enemy depending on various factors, such as the distance, the number, the strength, the order, and the morale of the opposing forces. He gives specific advice on how to deal with different scenarios, such as when the enemy is near or far, many or few, strong or weak, orderly or chaotic, etc. Sun Tzu advises the general to always seek to gain an advantage over the enemy by using deception, surprise, speed, and flexibility. He says that the general should avoid fighting the enemy on equal terms and instead look for opportunities to exploit the enemy's mistakes, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. He says that the general should also be aware of the terrain, the weather, and the timing, and use them to his favor. Sun Tzu also warns against being reckless, rash, or arrogant, and says that the general should be cautious, prudent, and humble. He says that the general should not underestimate the enemy, nor overestimate himself. He says that the general should not be lured by the enemy, nor be provoked by the enemy. He says that the general should not be greedy for gain, nor be afraid of loss. By following these guidelines, the general can engage the enemy in different situations and achieve victory. Chapter 8, Variations and Adaptability. In this chapter, Sun Tzu discusses how to adapt to changing circumstances and use different tactics to achieve victory. He says that the general should not follow a fixed plan, but be flexible and creative. He says that the general should use direct and indirect forces in harmony and balance, and vary his methods according to the situation. He says that the general should deceive the enemy, surprise the enemy, and exploit the enemy's mistakes. Sun Tzu advises the general to avoid fighting the enemy on equal terms, and instead look for opportunities to gain an advantage. He says that the general should avoid the enemy's strength and attack the enemy's weakness. He says that the general should also be aware of the terrain, the weather, and the timing, and use them to his favor. Sun Tzu also warns against being reckless, rash, or arrogant, and says that the general should be cautious, prudent, and humble. He says that the general should not underestimate the enemy, nor overestimate himself. He says that the general should not be lured by the enemy, nor be provoked by the enemy. He says that the general should not be greedy for gain, nor be afraid of loss. By following these guidelines, the general can adapt to changing circumstances and use different tactics to achieve victory. Chapter 9. In this chapter, Sun Tzu discusses how to move and deploy troops in different situations, such as when crossing mountains, rivers, marshes, or plains. He gives specific advice on how to choose the best routes, positions, and formations, and how to avoid or deal with natural obstacles, such as dust, wind, rain, or snow. He also explains how to observe and interpret the enemy's movements, signals, and intentions, and how to use deception, surprise, and speed to gain an advantage. He warns against being reckless, rash, or arrogant, and says that the general should be cautious, prudent, and humble. He says that the general should not underestimate the enemy, nor overestimate himself. He says that the general should not be lured by the enemy, nor be provoked by the enemy. He says that the general should not be greedy for gain, nor be afraid of loss. By following these guidelines, the general can move and deploy troops in different situations and achieve victory. Chapter 10 of The Art of War by Sun Tzu is titled Terrain, and it discusses the different types of terrain that a general may encounter in war and how to deal with them. Sun Tzu identifies 6 categories of terrain: accessible, entangling, deadlock, enclosed, precipitous, and distant. He gives advice on how to use the advantages and disadvantages of each terrain to one's benefit, and how to avoid falling into the enemy's traps. Sun Tzu also warns of the dangers of poor leadership and discipline in the army, and how they can lead to various calamities such as flight, impotence, decay, collapse, chaos, and rout. He stresses the importance of knowing one's own troops and the enemy's troops, as well as the terrain and the situation. He says that the general must be able to adapt to changing circumstances and act accordingly. Sun Tzu concludes the chapter by describing the qualities of elite troops and how they can be used for special operations that require speed, efficiency, and skill. He also lists 6 conditions that indicate defeat and how to avoid them. He emphasizes the role of the general in setting the tone and morale of the army, and how he must treat his soldiers as his own beloved sons. He says that the art of war is based on deception, calculation, and adaptation. In Chapter 11 of The Art of War, Sun Tzu discusses the 9 types of ground that a general may encounter in war, and the appropriate strategies for each one. He categorizes the ground base and how deep the army has penetrated into enemy territory, how advantageous the terrain is, and how desperate the situation is. He also gives advice on how to deal with the enemy's forces, how to take care of one's own troops, and how to use deception and division to gain the upper hand. The first 3 types of ground are dispersive, facile, and contentious. These are the grounds where the army is fighting in its own territory, has entered enemy land but not too deep, or is in a neutral or mutually beneficial position. Sun Tzu advises to avoid fighting on these grounds, as there is little to gain and much to lose. He says that the general should not halt on facile ground, should not attack on contentious ground, and should not block open ground. The next 3 types of ground are open, focal, and serious. These are the grounds where the army can move freely, is surrounded by 3 other states, or has made a deep incursion into enemy territory. Sun Tzu says that these grounds offer opportunities for alliances, plunder, and victory, but also require careful planning and preparation. He says that the general should form alliances on focal ground, plunder on serious ground, and keep his formations together on open ground. The last 3 types of ground are difficult, hemmed in, and desperate. These are the grounds where the army faces natural obstacles, is trapped by the enemy, or has no way out but to fight. Sun Tzu says that these grounds are the most dangerous and challenging, but also the most rewarding if overcome. He says that the general should keep moving on difficult ground, devise stratagems on hemmed-in ground, and fight on desperate ground. Sun Tzu concludes the chapter by emphasizing the importance of knowing the enemy and oneself, the terrain and the situation, and the advantages and disadvantages of each type of ground. He also stresses the role of the general in leading, disciplining, and caring for his troops, and in using deception, calculation, and adaptation to achieve victory. Chapter 12 Fire Attacks. In this short chapter, Sun Tzu and his commentators explain how to use fire as a weapon of war. They outline 5 methods of attacking with fire, burning the enemy's soldiers, supplies, equipment, warehouses, and lines of communication. They also advise on the best seasons, days, and times to start a fire, depending on the weather conditions and the direction and strength of the winds. The chapter emphasizes the importance of planning and preparation for fire attacks. The general must have the means and the material ready, and must observe the enemy's response before following up with an attack. If the fire causes panic and confusion in the enemy camp, the general should strike immediately. If the enemy remains calm, the general should wait for a better opportunity. Sun Tzu also warns against fighting out of anger or spite, as these emotions can cloud the judgment and lead to wasteful and foolish actions. He advises the ruler and the general to act only for gain or victory, and to fight only in a crisis. He says that fire is a powerful ally in war, but it must be used wisely and efficiently. He also mentions that water can be a useful asset too, as it can isolate the enemy but not kill them entirely. The chapter concludes with a reminder that the enlightened ruler is heedful and the good general is cautious. In this final chapter, Intelligence and Espionage, Sun Tzu discusses the importance of using spies and intelligence to gain an edge over the enemy. He claims that the cost of war is enormous, and that the best way to end it quickly is to have knowledge of the enemy's plans, strengths, and weaknesses. He says that this kind of knowledge cannot be obtained from omens or divination, but only from human sources. Sun Tzu identifies 5 types of spies that can be employed by a ruler or a general: native, internal, double, dead, and living. Native spies are people from the enemy's country who can provide information about the local conditions and sentiments. Internal spies are officials or soldiers in the enemy's government or army who can reveal secrets and create discord. Double spies are enemy spies who have been turned to work for the other side and can be used to spread false information or lure the enemy into a trap. Dead spies are spies who are deliberately exposed to the enemy with fabricated information and are expected to be killed or captured. Living spies are spies who return safely with valuable intelligence that is only shared with the ruler or the general. Sun Tzu emphasizes the need for wisdom, humanity, and justice in managing spies, as well as the ability to discern their truthfulness and reliability. He also warns against acting out of anger or spite, and advises to act only for the sake of gain or victory. The Art of War is a concise and insightful book that provides valuable lessons on leadership, strategy, and tactics. Sun Tzu's teachings are still relevant today, and his ideas have been applied to various fields beyond warfare. The book is a must-read for anyone interested in military history, strategy, or leadership. The book is well written and easy to read, despite being over 2,000 years old. Sun Tzu's writing style is clear and concise, and his ideas are presented in a logical and organized manner. The book is also filled with memorable quotes and anecdotes that illustrate Sun Tzu's teachings. Sun Tzu's teachings are based on the idea that the best way to win a war is to avoid it altogether. He believed that the best generals were those who could win without fighting. He emphasized the importance of understanding one's own strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of one's enemy. He also stressed the importance of deception and the use of spies to gain information about the enemy. One of the most famous quotes from The Art of War is, "All warfare is based on deception." Sun Tzu believed that deception was a key element of warfare, and that a skilled general could use deception to gain an advantage over the enemy. He also believed that a general should be flexible and adaptable, able to change tactics and strategies as the situation on the battlefield changed. Another important concept in The Art of War is the idea of the 5 factors. These factors are the way, the weather, the terrain, the leadership, and the discipline. Sun Tzu believed that a general who understood these factors could use them to gain an advantage over the enemy. He also believed that a general should be able to adapt to changing circumstances and take advantage of any weaknesses in the enemy's position. Sun Tzu's teachings have been applied to various fields beyond warfare. In business, his ideas have been used to develop strategies for marketing, sales, and management. In politics, his ideas have been used to develop strategies for diplomacy and negotiation. In sports, his ideas have been used to develop strategies for coaching and training. In conclusion, The Art of War is a timeless classic that provides valuable insights into the nature of warfare and leadership. The book is a must-read for anyone interested in military history, strategy, or leadership. Sun Tzu's teachings are still relevant today, and his ideas have been applied to various fields beyond warfare. The book is well written and easy to read, despite being over 2,000 years old. Sun Tzu's writing style is clear and concise, and his ideas are presented in a logical and organized manner. I highly recommend this book to anyone looking to improve their leadership skills or gain a better understanding of strategy and tactics.
Wish you all a happy reading and positive thinking.